Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today we are going to be talking about the highly volatile and on the brink of total collapse stock market. We're going to talk about the Doomsday Clock and what significant it has to the grand scheme of things here. We're going to talk about how mainstream media is now holding the preparedness community in high esteem. Many articles around the media are starting to talk about how right the preppers were and how everybody now needs to be a prepper. And because of this, we're going to round it out with a warning for people who are in the preparedness community, in the preparedness market, if you will, things to be on the lookout for in the next couple years here, as a lot of swindlers are going to start to enter this space. So stay tuned, guys. Let's talk about it. Alright guys, so no matter which index you look at, whether it's the Dow Jones or the S&P 500 or the Nasdaq, of course, which is going bananas, all of these do not reflect reality one bit, no matter how you slice it. Let me tell you what's happening here. All of this money which has been pumped back into the stock market, this is all inflation. That's all it is. All of that $10 trillion or whatever the hell amount of money that they've been printing in the printing press there at the mighty Federal Reserve, all that money through the purchasing of bonds and other sleights of hand has made its way into the stock market. And that is the only thing which is propping this up right now. Actually, that is not the only thing. Correction. Another part of this is that a lot of retail investors now are using these new technologies like the Square app or like the Robinhood app. It is now very easy for the average person to trade on the stock market. And a lot of the money that has been pumped into the market after the dip was from the retail consumer who's seen the opportunity, who said, okay, maybe the market's bottoming, so I got to get in. So lots of people got in at this time. And this is a very dangerous situation because all it's going to take for this whole thing to come crashing down and for the stock market to essentially liquidate is going to be one piece of bad news. All it's going to take is some bad news between the US and China or the superbug resurgence or whatever the case might be. That's all it's going to take. A pinprick right now can burst this entire bubble. So people need to be very careful. Many top investors are just saying that the risk reward right now of getting into the market are just nonsensical. I mean, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's got to be a duck at some point down the road. It's going to reveal itself for what it is. And that's all this market is right now. This market is not based on strong fundamentals. It's not based on a strong consumer economy. It's based on the fact that the Federal Reserve is basically paving the way for the retail consumer, and they're ensuring that the people who have all of their wealth in this market don't come back down to zero like the rest of us. Make no mistake about that. If you were Mark Zuckerberg on, March 18th when the crash really bottomed out, if you were him on the 18th, you were panicking because your net worth was practically cut in half. And that goes with all of these billionaires who, most of them, they're not liquid billionaires. That's something people need to realize, is that most people with lots of money, the overwhelming majority of that money is tied up in their stocks or their assets. So many of them, I would venture to say, are probably in the single-digit percentages with return in terms of how much cash on hand they actually have to spend. The majority of billionaire wealth is locked up in the stock market. And were it ever to actually liquidate and come down to the level of the marketplace, you would see sky-high inflation, because this is where they're hiding all of that inflation. Remember, there's only $2 trillion, I think, in the current cash supply that actually circulates. That's $2 trillion of cash out there that circulates. Now, if you were to even inject $1 trillion of actual cash, if there was a stock market bust and all of those retail investors cashed out, and they, I'm not sure how much that would amount to, but I'm sure it would amount to hundreds of billions of dollars, possibly even in the trillions if, some of the bigger investors also cashed out, then, and they actually go and buy some other hard assets, then that's going to cause rapid inflation. So right now, it's kind of like how the permafrost has trapped all the methane in. Once that permafrost melts and that methane gets released into the atmosphere, it's going to be a bad day for the hominid species of the earth. So in the same way, once one little piece of bad news deflates this hyperinflated stock market, and that's exactly what it is. There's some really weird 1984 stuff going on here where we're supposed to just believe that everything is great and don't worry about that stock market. It's decoupled from reality. There's no basis to the stock market in reality. It's all based on speculations and futures, and it's not tied to the sinking ship that is the US dollar, the US economy at all. So just don't worry about that. But the reality is, at any point, it could literally, the bubble can burst and we would be in for a tsunami of inflation. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I have been kind of swing trading the market a bit, and I actually have been doing better than most of these indexes throughout this, and that's not because I'm a great trader or anything like that. But the reason why I'm mostly on the sidelines with this is because I recognize that any money that you're making on the stock market right now, you're essentially taking that money from future generations, because all of that, those trillions of dollars, are going to be paid for in increased taxes and austerity, cuts to government programs. It's going to be human suffering that pays for any gains that are made in the stock market throughout this supposed rebound that we're seeing here. Because this is all fake. There's no basis in reality to this. They actually shut off the stock market. Remember that when they suspended the stock market, that one day when it was ready to just crash all the way to the bottom, they stopped trading that day because they knew what was going to happen. Then all of a sudden, they come in with the printing press, and then, okay, they saved the day, right? Because they're saving the billionaire class. It's the billionaires who benefit from that. Now, I have nothing against billionaires. And like I said, most billionaires only ever really spend millions of dollars on actual commodities. When you add up their house and their private jets and even their private islands, the amount of money they actually spend throughout the course of their lives, it really isn't that much. Most of their money is tied up in the permafrost, okay? And it's basically just a security plan for them should, things ever get really bad, that they have this bank that they can constantly tap when they need to. So my theory is right now is that the powers that be are aware of this. They're aware that if all of this money actually got out into circulation and people started spending it, we would see hyperinflation. If you added $1 trillion of that to the money supply, it would take down the value of all of the money by a third. You add $2 trillion, it's going to dilute it 2/3. So it's only going to be worth, a dollar is only going to be worth 30 cents. Okay, so it's my belief, because the whole economy is built on debt, that the only way it can keep going like this is if the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, or else the whole thing collapses, because all the money is tied up in the rich permafrost. And if that ever gets released into the market, the party's over, essentially, okay? And then everybody loses. So I'm not even sure if at this point they're trying to necessarily make the rich richer, because think about it. I mean, how much money can you actually ever spend in a lifetime? A lot of these billionaires, I mean, they just have their money in these projects, okay? They're never really going to see or spend most of it. So I don't really think that it's all about wanting to have trillionaires in the world, because there isn't nothing that $1 trillion can really buy you that, $1 billion couldn't. There's nothing worth that much in our world aside maybe some grand master plan, which is why lots of people like Warren Buffett plan on giving all their money away to charity. Okay, so this is not bashing on billionaires, but this is the quagmire that we are in right now. The bubble has to burst at some point. It cannot continue to go on like this, or else you're going to have rapid wealth discrepancy. And this is probably why they're trying to bring in the universal basic income. You get your $1,200 and Zuckerberg gets his billions and billions of dollars by having this stock market propped up, backstop like it is by the Fed. So just be warned that if you're a retail investor right now, that what is happening, if it doesn't seem normal, it probably isn't. And everybody's starting to harp on Warren Buffett because he sold his airline stocks, and now they're starting to creep up once again because of the government's pledged some money to them, which of course means that the taxpayers pledged some money to them. And I don't know what his reasons for were doing that. Maybe he just thought it was immoral. There could be that. You never know. But this is definitely a different market than he is used to, because he's not used to the Federal Reserve printing trillions of dollars and buying junk bonds and, basically propping up these corporations which otherwise would have folded. But now, of course, you, the taxpayer, are on the line to make sure that they can continue to waste money and precious resources, and of course, probably worst of all of our time. All right, so let's talk about the Doomsday Clock. So what it basically is, it's a symbol that represents a likelihood of a man-made global catastrophe. This was something which was started in 1947 by the bullet of atomic scientists. So these great minds come together, and they have this arbitrary symbol, which is not really based on anything other than speculation. So they put their collection of knowledge together, which is comprised of many Nobel laureates, to determine how risky the current state of affairs is. And it's important that I talk about this to segue into why the preppers are now being hailed as some of the coolest people on the earth thing. Now, on January 23rd, 2020, the Doomsday Clock was moved to 100 seconds to midnight, the closest it has ever been in all of history. So this is before the superbug really started to spread. This was before the rift began to deepen between the United States and China, whereas now it's at an all-time low. And it's pretty clear that China has now supplanted Russia as the main nemesis of the United States. It did not take into account all of the economic ramifications that we're seeing now. So I am guessing that in the next few months, we may see this moved even closer to midnight, because all of these factors now, all of this stuff is pointing to the reasons why everybody from here on in needs to have a preparedness plan. For the longest time, you've had the smartest people in the world coming together and working on this Doomsday Clock. These are the people who are the real doomers, if there ever is such a thing. These are the people who are saying, here, look, here's the evidence, here's the likelihood and the probability that the proverbial shit is going to hit the fan at some point in the future. But nobody ever listens. Now, some of the main things that they claim to be problematic for the future of mankind, of course, is going to be the climate issue. And in addition to that, there's technologically propelled propaganda and basically the war on democracy. And there's something that everybody needs to be aware of. If you're ever a part of an online chat forum, or if you're ever partaking in a protest which is organized online, just be warned that there's all sorts of groups around the world right now who have armies of people who do nothing but all day but incite different disagreement and discourse within North America, and probably vice versa as well. I'm sure there's seeds of revolution trying to be planted all over the world. So there's a lot of subversion going on the internet, and that is just one thing to bear in mind, that if you can't see somebody in the flesh, if you don't know where they get their funding from, then be very skeptical of whatever directives or whatever suggestions they're recommending for you to do, especially now that we move into the whole political season, and with this whole geopolitical stuff in the world, very scary times are coming in the future. And you know what? I just came back from the grocery store today, and I paid $12 for a small bag of grapes, and I totally was caught off guard when I went to the till. I'm like, this can't be right. And the lady's like, yeah, it's crazy. It's bananas. Okay? So, well, it was grapes, but you get the point. It's just the food prices are going to continue to go up, and this is how this inflation is going to make its way into the economy. So just be very warned that if there's a stock market bubble, it's time to get a hold of some hard assets as quickly as possible, or just buy stuff with your money while you can, because once that starts and once the bank runs start, and all of that craziness begins, oh boy, I don't even want to go there. Let's talk about how preppers are being revered around the world. So in this article here, this one is by The Guardian, which is a very renowned British newspaper, or formerly known as a newspaper. Now, of course, it's online. We mock preppers and survivalists until the pandemic hit. I'll just read you a quick excerpt of this. You've heard of preppers, right? Survivalists. If you watch TV shows like Doomsday Preppers, you know about their strange apocalyptic beliefs. that a disaster could strike any time, overwhelming first responders and the social safety net. That this crisis could disrupt supply chains, causing scarcity, panic, and societal breakdown. The authorities might even invoke emergency powers and impose police curfews. Crazy theories like that. In fact, many reputable organizations, including the U.S. federal government and Red Cross, maintain extra food and emergency supplies. Things that we've been talking about on this channel all along is that the government are the biggest preppers out there. I did that one video about the governments and the bunkers and all the underground complexes and the black budgets that they use to fund basically preparing for the end of the world as we know it. It's the government that everybody trusts who are the biggest preppers on earth, but when it comes to the actual individual, the independently minded person who is cautious about the future, then all of a sudden they're deemed a nutcase. Now, I'm not making any apologies for those preppers who are on the fringe, and I've said on this channel many times before, just because you're a prepper doesn't mean we're going to necessarily be best friends. Do I think some people take it too far? Do I think that some people's paranoia about the future is not substantiated by the evidence? Yes, absolutely. There are some people like that. But when you take a baseline average of people's views towards these kind of things in society, the average person is completely oblivious to all of the support systems that have to be in place to maintain their standard of living. Most people have no idea that they're even hooked up to this giant technological incubator which keeps them alive. And that is very dangerous. And that's what a lot of people found out throughout this crisis. And now I think that the idea of a prepper is going to become more refined, because even the doomsday preppers now are going to have to change their approach to things, because now we've caught a glimpse, a small glimpse of what it might actually be like. Now, we were lucky enough that it wasn't nearly as severe as a lot of people thought it was going to be, although the second wave, historically speaking, they're far more lethal. They tend to not only kill the elderly, but it also kills the younger generation. At least that's what happened in the Spanish flu. The majority of people who passed on in that one was the young. So if this thing undergoes a mutation in the southern hemisphere, in Brazil right now, and it comes back up with a vengeance in fall and winter, then, I guess we'll see. And of course, this isn't the last superbug. There's going to be many, many more. And so we got a taste of what it's actually going to be like now. But I think the whole practice of preparedness, now that everybody is essentially got a crash course in prepping, it's going to be a lot more realistic. And it's going to be more practical. And there's going to be less, what if this? Because now we're going to have this real world experience, something that the whole world experienced, something that wasn't just limited, like a localized disaster or Hurricane Katrina. Now we're going to know what the global ramifications are going to be. So as much as this situation has royally sucked, you could make the argument that now, because a lot more people are going to be self-reliant, or at least aspire to be more self-reliant, they're going to have a greater awareness of the web of technology that basically sustains them. And hopefully in the long run, it's going to be a good thing. Now, I should say that there's going to be a lot of people that just forget about all this in a few months and go right back to their way of living, which is why there likely will be a resurgence, particularly the young generation. But I think now the millennial crowd, the 30-somethings, late 20 to 30-something generation has been reminded of, the 80s and the 70s, what those decades were like if you lived in North America. They weren't always the greatest. So let's look at another article here by another reputable news agency, Phys.org. Phys.org is kind of like a Scientific American. They've been around for a long time. They don't publish any nonsense. This is a strictly science-based website with no nonsense. Now, they talk about doomsday prepping in the age of the superbug. This was written May 14th. Now, this article was written by a guy who conducted what's called ethnographic research. So he was an anthropologist, and he studied preppers from 6 countries, around 100 preppers. And basically what he found is what lots of us know, in that most preppers are not, in fact, preparing for doomsday. They're everyday people who anticipate and try to adapt for many conditions of calamity, conditions in which they believe inevitable and have been exponentially escalated through human hubris and excessive reliance on technology and global trade networks. So that's basically what's happened in the last 3 months. While the disasters they anticipate might, at the more extreme end of the spectrum, include major resets like an all-out nuclear war or massive electromagnetic pulse from the sun that would basically fry our fragile electronics, most preppers stockpile for low to mid-level crises like the ones that the world is experiencing right now. So once again, we're starting to see a more positive attitude towards preppers, which is great. I think that this is excellent, but there's going to be a word of caution here at the end, because I guarantee if you thought that the Doomsday Prepper show put us in the limelight, you haven't seen nothing yet. Once the Hollywood reopens, we're going to get all kinds of reality TV shows about preppers. And here's another one from The Atlantic. Okay, so this one says, we should all be preppers. Wow, what a coincidence. Chances are you have a neighbor who is ready for this pandemic. Actually, chances are you probably didn't. Because as far as I know, the estimate of how many people actually consider themselves preppers is downwards of 3%. And herein lies the problem. When you have a market which is now going to be one of the most popular markets on earth, and you only have 3% adoption of that market, you now have 97% of potential people to cater to. And this is what happened with a lot of personal protective equipment, is that only 3% of people were prepared to endure, and the other 97% filed in at the same time, and they realized that this is a big game of musical chairs. There's only 3 seats, and there's 100 of us, and only 3 of us are going to get a seat. Only 3 of us are going to get the supplies that we need. Herein lies the problem as to why there's going to be a lot of scams coming onto the market. I'll talk about that in a little bit. So they start off by saying, chances are you have a neighbor who is ready for this pandemic. If you knew they were stockpiling before the disaster, you likely thought they were weirdos. That's something that I've always not really taken offense to, because I know how it works. You know, if you do anything which kind of runs counter to the society, especially if it's to do with relying on yourself for anything and not trusting in the whole consensus of what's going on, then you're definitely going to be marginalized and ostracized by society and talked about. But of course, you know, when the shit hits the fan, you know who they call, right? Let me go on here. And if you knew they were stockpiling for disaster, you thought they were weirdos. I know I did, even as I traveled the world writing the book about them. Not anymore. Although preppers have long been the subject of ridicule, I imagine many of us will take on some of their habits, or at the very least, make a space in our closets, in our garages, for non-perishables. Now, here's the funny thing about this whole situation, is that as a prepper, I didn't find this to be much of an SHTF situation at all. There was times, as you know, as I've documented in my videos, where I was starting to get a little concerned, and I was paying a lot more attention to this starting to rapidly devolve. But, you know, we're prepared for situations which are 100 times worse than this. So when you're so used to being ridiculed by these people, and you see them now latching on to prepping after what at least I perceive to be a very minute SHTF light situation, I start to get a little concerned. But hey, I mean, if that motivates them to get to prepping, then all the better. They go on to say, the crisis has also highlighted how woefully inadequate many of our living arrangements are for social distancing. Now, this is something, you know, I've talked about also on the channel many times before, the urban-rural divide. It's a catch-22 living in cities, because that's where all the opportunity is, but it's also where you're living on top of each other, and it's also where you're at the greatest whim of the system. If there's any perturbations in the system, you feel them first. And of course, you're in very close proximity to everybody else, and there's a lot less leeway for things to go wrong in those situations. So it's a gamble. If you want to live in one of those environments, yeah, you make a lot of money in New York City in certain occupations, But of course, not in the last 3 months, you haven't. So that's something to consider. Now, I want to say also, this is a very rare event. So I don't think somebody who's been stockpiling stuff for 30 years and living like a shut-in for the last 30 years can necessarily even justify all the sacrifices they've had to make for this one instance. So that's why I take a more balanced view of prepping, and that's why I don't think that, you need to go all out and necessarily get the bunker and totally distance yourself from society. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's going to be great to have a bunker when I do eventually get one, but I think you still need to be a part of the evolution of the human species. You still need to try to be a part of the system to some degree and try to get out of it what you can and also put back into it what you can. So unlike some people, I don't think this is the time to gloat and get all high and mighty on ourselves, because there's a lot of us who've spent a lot of time on this. And, what inconvenience did we really have throughout this whole process? We had to wait a little longer for something. We had to pay a little bit more for something. So this wasn't the big SHTF that I think most of us prepare for. What we prepare for is a much more magnified version of this, which definitely may be coming down the road, as indeed we are, ever so closer to midnight. Now, there's countless articles like this on all the major mainstream news sources. I'm not going to read them all, but I am going to now issue a word of caution. You need to be aware that in the next couple years, there's going to be all sorts of media popping up and all sorts of marketing scams and online stores who are really going to try to take advantage of people's lack of knowledge in this particular area. And I think eventually it's going to level out. You know how the market eventually tends to sift out the garbage, and the good stuff rises to the top over time. But in the meantime, there's going to be a lot of scammers entering the space. And I can tell you, I literally get a dozen emails a day from not only Chinese companies, but also American companies, and even companies that I do business with right now, trying to sell personal protective equipment, which I question is even at standard. See, what happened was everybody wanted to get in on this whole prepping market after it was too late. It was kind of like the FOMO thing, okay? So now there's an excess supply of these KN95 masks and a lot of this stuff floating around out there, and they're trying to offload it onto people at what I think are outrageous prices. I mean, a surgical mask used to sell for 10 cents. Now they're selling for $2 in some places, which is just crazy. But people are willing to pay that much for a decent mask. So what I've tried to do all along at CanadianPreparedness.com is make sure that the products that we carry are always premium, high-quality products. There is only one supplier right now that we work with that I think has some questionable stuff that we're thinking of parting ways with, and honestly, they only comprise maybe like 2 to 3% of all of the products we sell. And I mean, we sell everything from crossbows to solar systems to lithium battery banks to Japanese saws, knives. We're starting to get into the knife space more. Bugout rolls, high quality survival trinkets, very high quality flashlights, backpacks from reputable companies like VanQuest and Fallraven and companies like that we're going to be getting into. Berkey water filtration systems, Motorola walkie-talkies. We sell quality gear, and I'm going to be making a video in the next few days about what to look for when you are purchasing gear if you're just entering this space, because the purpose of this channel has always been, and I've sometimes been criticized for not preaching to the choir enough, but the purpose of this channel is to broaden the appeal of prepping. Okay, like if you have a prepping channel, it's my opinion that you should want to grow that channel. You should want the end goal, if you're trying to educate people about, hey, you need to maybe take these things seriously and be prepared when things go bad, why wouldn't you want more people to hear that message? Now, a lot of people think you can just turn the camera on and people are going to start listening. And you don't have to put any work into the production and the editing and all the animations and all of the images and the stock footage and all that stuff you use. You don't have to put any work into that. You just should have to, come with a great idea, not package it, and everybody should just come and listen to it. And if they don't, it's their problem because you're being authentic. Well, unfortunately, the world doesn't work that way. That's not how things work. We are competing with all of the popular YouTubers on here for eyeballs, and that is not an easy task. And if you think it's an easy task, I would encourage you to try it. So my recommendation is that if you want to start a YouTube channel, put a lot of work into your production, put a lot of work into bringing attention to the video in the first place. If you don't have a compelling thumbnail, then nobody's going to want to watch the video. But in addition to that, you need to deliver quality content. You need to deliver information that people are going to be able to integrate into their lives somehow in a way which is hopefully practical and positive. We talk a lot about the darker side of things and the cynical projections about how things go, with the hope that it has some positive influence on people in some way, shape, or form. Either they're more prepared, or maybe they just learn something. Maybe it helped them to hedge their bets in a certain way or see things from a different perspective. Whatever the case may be, no matter how dark the subject matter of the videos I make, I want people to walk away with something of value. So that's what I got for you today, guys. Be very suspicious of the economy, and also be very cautious about the superbug, which is now starting to go down significantly in the US. And that same pattern was present in 1918. Remember, it all but disappeared in 1918 throughout the summer months, and it came back with a devastating vengeance. There was 10 times the amount of cases, 10 times the amount of death. It killed younger people also. So we need to keep these things in mind. And the Doomsday Clock continues to get closer and closer to midnight. Now there's issues with India and China at the border. And of course, India is an ally of the United States. And so you just all of these situations that are just piling up around the world. So do not get complacent in these times. Don't be fooled by the funny money printing press, which is inflating that stock market. Because remember, once that permafrost melts and that methane finds its way into the environment, things are going to heat up really quick. Only those people in the climate scene are going to get the reference there. And finally, preppers are finally getting the respect that they deserve. But let's keep it that way by keeping our focuses practical and keeping them divorced from all of the political stuff. I try not to get very political on this channel. I try to strictly focus on how do you survive in all of these situations and what would you do. Regardless of politics, the principles tend to always be the same. And lastly, of course, beware of the incoming scammers who are going to try to sell you a bunch of cheap junk. But you can rely on CanadianPreparedness.com to always get you the best deals. Use coupon code SurvivalPrepper for 10% off. Thanks for the support, guys. Let me know what your take on the current economic situation is in the comments section below. Canadian Prepper out. The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com. Your one-stop shop for premium, high-quality, brand-name products that have been tried and tested by myself and other YouTube gear reviewers. My subscribers save 10% off by using the coupon code SurvivalPrepper. All one word in all caps.